Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. We've got for you another live stream and Q&A this week. It's mostly going to be dominated by your guys' questions and comments and anything you'd like to discuss. It doesn't have to be Star Wars related, could be about any topic. If you have other pop culture franchises or anything in the world of sports or whatever you'd like to discuss, here's your chance to talk about. This is a true Ask Us Anything week. There is basically no news. We have one news story, as you can see from the thumbnail and the title, that we will discuss here first. And after that, it is completely up to your guys' questions. So keep sending in those questions into the chat. I already see we have a lot of good stuff coming in on the chat already. So keep that up. Send it in. We will get to it first come, first serve. You want to make sure you get a chat here on the stream tonight. We will be going for the next hour to hour and a half, depending on the flow of the conversation. Send in a super chat, helps out the channel, and you get your question bumped up to the top. We have a lot of members here in the chat as well, and we do have Patreon and YouTube membership programs if you'd like to check those out for more Star Wars Lads content. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the first topic, which is going to be that Natasha Liu Bordizzo just did an interview where she revealed that Ahsoka is not going to start its second season shoot until next summer, summer 2025, which will ultimately lead to a 2026 release for Ahsoka season 2. So that's an interesting concept, especially when all we know from 2025 Star Wars right now is Andor season 2. We don't know what else is coming. Is there going to be more animation that's announced at Celebration? Is there another live action show that's further down the road than we thought? Is there going to be like Lando or one of these other projects to surprisingly show up? Is there something secret that we haven't heard about? Because Skeleton Crew was secret and didn't get revealed to anybody before it got announced at Celebration. Granted, it was in the very early stages. They weren't shooting, and they'd kind of be needing to shoot soon on a Star Wars show if they were going to release it next year. But are we just getting Andor season 2 and that's it? Is there nothing else coming? I'm sure there will be a handful of other things, like maybe there'll probably be a Visions announcement for season 3 next year at Celebration Japan, and we'll get that at some point. Is there maybe more tales, whether it's Tales of the Bounty Hunter or Tales of the Sith or something like that that we can announce for next year? But right now with Ahsoka was our one hope for possibly getting another live action Star Wars season next year, and it's looking like 2026 is going to be the possibility. Now, shooting next summer, though, does mean that there's a strong possibility this is in the first half of 2026, which is good because, we want to see this story unfold, and how closely will it connect with Mandalorian and Grogu? Will they try to use it to or put it out after Mandalorian and Grogu to kind of use that momentum of hopefully that film's success to piggyback off of for Ahsoka season 2? There could be a lot of marketing strategy around that decision, and now with Dave Filoni as CCO, all interesting things here. But Sanak, what were your thoughts when you heard that now Ahsoka season 2 is pretty much confirmed for 2026?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little difficult to swallow, especially since that was, at least on our channel, like one of the shows that we like genuinely just like had a great time with, even if it kind of slipped up a little bit there at the end. It was just a nice, like joyous level of Star Wars, right? It did things that we were kind of hoping the Manoverse was going to do with a character like Ahsoka, where she's crossing her arms a lot. She's pretty stoic, almost emotionless compared to her Clone Wars and Rebels version. There was a nice story reason to it, and the nice lesson using Hayden to like kind of evolve her back into that version, get her to become the Ahsoka the White, the Gandalf the White kind of version that is able to be knowledgeable, is able to have that wisdom, but still has that spark that we always genuinely love about that character. And Sabine might be a slightly controversial character when it comes to her becoming force sensitive after being just such a wonderful Mandalorian, but that's really like minor compared to like a lot of other Star Wars shows and some of their flaws that's been coming out, right? Like that's just more of like a hey, we're we're leaning a little too much into our EU philosophy, our EU inspiration, where anybody suddenly is like a Jedi after like being an incredible pilot, or incredible infantry person or something, right? So I'm not terribly upset by something like that. But I can see why people are a little upset with the level of quality that show is, which while good is not like anything incredible, and now basically waiting closer to 3 years than 2 years for a second season, which presumably will also be like that final season of the show. And I mean, it's a couple of things, right? The Mandoverse as a whole internally is viewed as like one story, right? In all honesty, you could call the Book of Boba Fett the Mandalorian, the Book of Boba Fett. You could have called Ahsoka the Mandalorian, Ahsoka's journey, or like
Mhm.
something else, right? Like it isn't like an own individual show like the Acolyte or an Obi-Wan Kenobi where they have their specific focuses and characters. These are characters that will eventually come together, rebound, have an effect on each other, even if they are very distantly spread out. But it's also unfortunate that like because it is one grand story, these waits are going to be a little bit more elongated than any other of these big blockbuster franchise streaming shows like House of the Dragon or Rings of Power, Wheel of Time, all these certain things, right? So it's frustrating, right? Especially with this big budget push of the early 2020s, but it is a realistic, change to what's happened since COVID kind of came down to a more acceptable level for society, right? Where people are now out and about. Like streaming shows have always just been like money thrown at things, right? Like they've never really gotten numbers or any credibility with public viewers to the point of saying, like, yeah, like I really understand how the money was used in the same way a movie is. And at some point, all this was meant to just build up and stockpile like different franchises, different companies who have these ownerships with IPs. And with COVID, it was free reign to just go crazy with it, right? So that combination of that major ongoing story of the Mandoverse paired with just like Chapek era throwing money at the wall, it was always kind of going to burst. The question was just how quickly and how dramatically, and now we're feeling it. Right now we're feeling the strains of like CGI departments still trying to work through all these different things. The strain of like an industry that's pushing to elevate its theatrical releases once more after a couple of bad years in theaters. And I think one of the biggest things for sure is that the streaming era of like having shows be continued after being introduced on one streaming service or on a different network, that's over, right? Like there's so many shows now that we really don't know if they're even going to get picked up for a second season. It used to be like, is it going to get a third season? Is it going to get a fourth season? Now it's like, are we even sure that first season is going to have a full commitment, full marketing before it's preemptively canceled in so many cases, right? And that's where, for a lot of people, I can understand the frustrations of the Acolyte being canceled, right? So publicly, but it's not. I don't think it's necessarily because of the success or lack thereof of the show. I think it's more for the fact that everybody's going through this. Like this is what's happening with every streamer, unless you got Amazon money, unless you've got so much of like HBO's background and like so many props and set production that they can reuse over different shows. All these other streamers are struggling, and Disney theoretically should have it, but they don't, right? That's or at least they're not willing to give that much to TV. So hearing that news, it's annoying, but this is the problem of having a big story, having this be a chapter in that story, having Dave Filoni elevated to CCO and now having a lot more hands-on with the movie side, on the overall vision of everything going on in Star Wars. This is just the industry-wide thing. It's not simply Disney. I understand the frustrations, but fact is, like, Ahsoka even getting a season 2 in this climate is incredible, right? A lot of streamers are just ending their entire services after their flagship show, like a Halo, stops working. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Paramount Plus is gone in like 6 months. Like it is rough right now. So it's terrible to hear that. I hope her wording is more so that like she just won't be available because she has to keep her calendar closed off for like reshoots and stuff like of that manner, or maybe they're chunking out different blocks of episodes. There is the rumor that it's not going to be solely on Peridia. There might be a lot of things going on with Thrawn in the galaxy, while we assume a lot of that might be in the Mandalorian and Grogu or another season of the Mandoverse, right? So I can understand maybe that her stuff is being saved for later with Rosario Dawson or whatnot. Maybe that's a more practical logistical reason why, but overall, I just think there's just so much uncertainty, and this is just such a massive franchise and a massive ongoing story that while it sucks, it's just mirroring what a lot of these other big streamers who are able to like cancel out some of the noise. they're still deferring to, right? I think once the movies are like 2024 level of box office for 2, 3 years, which, that's also quite uncertain, then maybe streaming shows and movies will be better connected, better balanced like they were originally envisioned, but yeah, I mean, COVID changed the game for really worse ways, and we're still dealing with the effects of it, and that's just how it's gonna be, and hopefully we get to see continuations of great stories, continuations of Star Wars stories, but yeah, that's what it's gonna be like, and I hope that, that's just maybe her being conservative with her timeline.
Yeah, I hope so too, but I think uncertainty is the perfect word for this whole situation, and I think frankly, when we look at the 2026 release for Ahsoka, I mean, it feels like an eternity ago, but I remember almost exactly a year ago right now when we were doing our Ahsoka reviews, right? And we're talking about, okay, what is gonna happen in this show? Because is there a season 2 or is it the Dave Filoni movie that is following up the Ahsoka timeline? Well, the Dave Filoni movie was always rumored to come out in 2026. And so to me, this isn't that surprising when you look at what his whole schedule was and what has morphed out of his movie. And I'm still, you know, really not convinced we ever get Dave Filoni's movie. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, and if we do, it might be in that new Jedi Order esque way of how all these different authors are writing these all the different books and in this big pipeline. I think that's gonna be kinda it. He might be the James Luceno of that initiative where he's chosen to do the finale, but is that gonna be in 2035 at this point? Like, when does that happen, and how long down the road do they drag out this story? Because I think from what they've noticed over the last few years, with not just like you were mentioning, streaming in general, numbers that they saw between 2021 and beginning of 2022 or 2020 through the beginning of 2022 are just not really reliable numbers because those were in a bubble, just like the numbers they saw last year at the box office weren't necessarily reliable numbers because those were in a negative bubble. They're trying to figure out, okay, what's the future of Star Wars? What's the future of this franchise? Were these movies we announced, are they worth putting all this money into and doubling down, or do we want to restructure this project? And I truly believe that the Mandalorian and Grogu is basically going to be Mandalorian season 1 again. Like we're getting a fresh reset. People who haven't seen the show aren't going to have to have seen it. People who have seen the show are going to have lots of Easter eggs and interesting things. Wouldn't be surprised if there's cameos or references to a bunch of stuff in Ahsoka season 2. I think their mission ultimately is to start determining what is streaming, what is live action film, and then which things cross over, which things are good enough. If I'm being honest from what I get from this kind of story as well, and the way it took them so long to announce Ahsoka season 2, I truly do think they were hoping that Ahsoka blew up like Mandalorian blew up, and that they could do that movie that Dave Filoni was going to do, and it was going to be an Ahsoka movie. It was going to piggyback off Ahsoka season 1, but it didn't blow up that way, and the reception to it was a little more mixed. Then we get the Mandalorian movie announcement. There's just so much shakeup around this universe right now, and I think hopefully the one positive of this being 3 years after the first season of the show is that hopefully they've at least solidified a direction. It's not just a reactionary thing of like, "Oh, well, people liked Ahsoka and Mandalorian season 2, now we can do a show on her," the show Dave has always wanted to do. Now, hopefully, it's reactionary. It's not a reactionary, and more so of, okay, Ahsoka's one of our franchises, Boba Fett's one of our franchises, Mandalorian's one of our franchises. They all tie into a larger picture here. What Mandalorian is going to drive that, but how do we structure all this stuff around it to where the TV is supporting the film, and then these TV characters are popular enough to show up in the film and people are excited about them, and then hopefully we can turn what was a TV show character now into another film character. And I think it's all about franchising, it's all about elevating, and hopefully that means a little bit more structure like the MCU. I've never thought Star Wars should be run but like the MCU, but when you have pocket universes like this, when you're trying to create little universes around certain stories, it certainly should be structured like the MCU, where you have plans and you stick to them, and there's no changes and there's no coming up with things on the fly. Yeah, you might add a movie here or there, add a show here or there, but there really shouldn't be this wait for like, are we doing a season 2 of this show? either I think they have now decided we need to either commit or we don't. And I think this is kind of them committing, right? This is ultimately with
Yeah.
Ahsoka season two's announcement. I think they're hoping Ahsoka kind of takes over that TV side until she's popular enough to be a film character, and Mandalorian will dominate the film side of this universe and ultimately will lead eventually to that big final film, whether it's directed by Filoni still or is directed by Favreau, which I'm probably leaning towards it probably being directed by Favreau eventually. They're going to do some type of big finale, but they want this to be a universe. They want to build this up. And I think seeing this pushback, like some people are saying in the chats, it is also reaction to just making sure they get that movie perfect, not using resources that they might need for the film in order to, devote them to Ahsoka, kind of that spread of too many things going on at the same time. They're hoping they can lock it down and make these things the best they can possibly be. And from that standpoint, I can't really complain. But
Yeah.
we do need to start not making shows every 3 years. Like that that's ridiculous wait for a TV show. I appreciate the production value that's put in here, but like we used to get TV shows back in the day, 5, 6 years ago. We used to get TV shows on cable uh, every 9 months a year. They would end in May and start in September. And now, in the age of streaming, we got used to okay, 1 year waits in between seasons. It's getting pretty crazy to get to 2 to 3 year waits. And we already had a 2 year wait for Mandalorian because Mandalorian basically ended at the end of or beginning of 2021 and then started at the beginning of 2023. So it was a little over a 2 year wait for Mandalorian seasons. Now we're having a 3 year wait for an Ahsoka season. It is too much because I think you're relying too much on your audience's interest into properties that didn't necessarily show that they had the legs to carry a 3 season wait for a TV show. Like I think you're really missing an
Yeah.
opportunity there. And that's going to be the big thing is do audiences return and how much of Mandalorian gets people excited. And I really do hope Thrawn's a big part of that Mandalorian movie because I would love this season two to just be about Ahsoka and Sabine and Balin. Like I think that would be the more interesting side of the story. Leave Thrawn over in the main universe. You don't need to cross over all these things. Let's move Hera and Thrawn into the Mandalorian storytelling or more New Republic storytelling. Let's leave the Mortis stuff to Ahsoka season two, and let's really dive into it and create that focus. But what do you guys think? We have a lot of chats here in the comments. Let us know what you guys think of this story because even though we don't have much news, this is kind of a big news story because it really dictates the rest of next year for Star Wars. Do you guys think that we get another Star Wars live action show outside of Andor season two next year? Do you think that means, we had talked about before with Andor season two being kind of pushed back because Skeleton Crew will go into the beginning of January and then we have Daredevil that's coming out in March? Do you guys now think that that means Andor is coming out at the end of the summer or September like it did when it originally came out? What do you guys think of this whole story and what it means for the rest of Star Wars in 2025? And then 2026 is going to be a nuts year for the film industry, but and Disney properties, but it's going to be crazy for Star Wars as well. There's going to be so much stuff in that year. So hopefully all of it doesn't, you know, uh, eat itself up. We have room for Star Wars and Avengers in the same year and all the big Disney properties. So let us know what you guys think in the comments. We do have a super chat from David. Thank you so much, David, for sending in your super chat. We greatly appreciate your support. David says, you guys think the Gorman massacre is in Andor season 2 and we see Mon fleeing the Senate and openly joining the rebellion? What are you most excited for in Andor season 2? Well, I've been talking for a little bit, so I'll pass that to you first, Sanak. What do you think? Do we see the Gorman massacre in Andor season 2 and kind of a recreation of some of those rebels elements?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it is very potent for her storytelling. It was already quite potent for her in Legends, even though it's not really like explored to such detail. But there have been some shots in the behind the scenes that really, really imply like large crowds protesting and everything. And if you don't know what the Gorman Massacre is, it let's just say a ship lands very gently on some people, right? And a certain moth is behind that, and yeah, it's a massacre for a reason, right? It is messy, it is terrifying, but it's also never really been told visually. And I mean, that is a thing with Mon Mothma's character. for the longest time, she was really just like some shots in Revenge of the Sith and primarily the speech in Return of the Jedi. Rest of it was the early EU books, and even then, she's kind of like retired and like dies pretty quickly, peacefully, but pretty quickly. And the New Republic era of the whole story, which I don't know if I always agreed with that choice. I always thought there was some potency to having her even being like a supporting character. I mean, they did so much with like an Admiral Akbar, even with New Jedi Order, even with his health issues and retirement, right? Like I never really saw a reason for not having Mon Mothma and like how she would react to another huge burdensome conflict. But that's me digressing a little bit. I do think this will happen. Absolutely. I think that's what's going to make her most narratively connected with the story. If there is a criticism that I do have about Andor season 2, I felt like every character had some part to play with Luthen Rail, and then Luthen Rail was kind of doing a thing with Mon Mothma. She was like selling off her daughter essentially to an arranged marriage to hide some of her dealings and stuff like that, right? And it's an emotional story. It's a difficult story for her to be like undergoing, and I think you know it's handled as well as it could be, but that doesn't mean that it's not still like disconnected. It doesn't mean that it's not like something that you can almost kind of skip over if you really want to know like the big things of Andor season 1 and like the big conflicts. She hasn't necessarily done anything yet. She's almost like still in that planning stage. She's still in that getting my all my affairs in order before I have to make this eventual leap. This is me being under surveillance, right? And I appreciate that the patience that Tony has. Knowing that he did also want this to be 5 seasons, but ended up being like, no, 2 seasons makes most sense for me, and the commitment that would be required for this project. I wish she had a little bit more narrative agency kicking in the second half of Andor. But this Gorman massacre will get her really locked in. I'm very curious to see what Luthen's reaction will be to it. I'm sure Saw Gerrera and all these other people will have very strong reactions. We know that she's had some scenes shot with Cassian Andor, kind of helping her escape and lead her away. I wouldn't be surprised if Cassian is not directly connected to her eventual appearance in Rebels. I'm sure he's got other missions that Luthen's going to push him towards, or other Yavin rebel leadership is going to push her towards. I really could see this being more of a Draven and someone else kind of guiding her towards these Lothal rebels. And again, even if we don't see them, I would love to almost like see a shot of like Chopper or someone else, like just the legs or flight suit of like Hera, just as like the door is opening for her, and then that's like her last shot of the season. But I don't know. While I think it's going to be the most important thing to her story, I wouldn't be surprised if we still do start off dealing with the consequences of season 1. She still needs to see her daughter married off. She still needs to deal with her niece, who's been involved with Cassian and his missions under Luthen for a while. I do think a lot of her early story has to almost bring in Bail Organa, who is another great candidate with how directly connected he is to the Lothal rebels and to the whole Fulcrum program, to bring in you know bring her into the grander narrative of Rebels, but for her to bring him into more mature storytelling, more politically driven storytelling that Andor season 1 definitely mastered, right? Like Jimmy Smits deserves to see Bail Organa elevated to more than just like the prequel whimsy and like some of the book storytelling, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is a lot more just personal stuff with Leia. I want to see him and like who he really is and shaped up to be when him and Mon Mothma are working hand in hand in Rogue One. So yeah, I think all that setup stuff still has to happen. But then Gorman Massacre is building, and then that's what becomes like the whole narrative impetus for hopefully mid-season, hopefully third or fourth part of the season, and then she might end the story a little earlier than we necessarily want her to be, but that's okay because she has the original trilogy. She has a confirmed story past this. We know she doesn't die, so it's
Right.
nice to at least leave her where her story has to end instead of like elongating it and making it feel adrift like season 1 did.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I do think they should touch on that stuff. They have proven in this show and with some of the things they've discussed here in the promotion for season 2 that they're willing to connect to the rest of Star Wars, even if this tonally feels completely different than most of Star Wars. And Rebels, like you couldn't have two more completely different tones between
Yeah.
Rebels and Andor. But I would like to at least see or hear some hints of the connection. I don't necessarily need to see scenes recreated from Rebels, but I would like to at least see perspectives of that, like Mon Mothma's speech that's heard across the galaxy. We could see it from Luthen's perspective or Andor's perspective watching it on the hologram. We don't necessarily need to see it happening. Um, and it depends on who they focus on. I tend to think that the way they're structuring this season, that kind of each of the big characters from season one are going to be the leads of each of the arcs. And it's kind of going to be an arc that wraps up each of their stories. But Cassian's the through line between all of them. He's the one that's doing the mission for each of them that wraps them up. I think that's kind of going to be how they structure it. And ultimately, that kind of means that Mon Mothma wouldn't necessarily be the main character of multiple different arcs. It might just be one big arc, 1, 3, 4 episodes where she's the main character and a lot of big things happen for her. And that's where the scary kind of thing is in this show of how do you pick up all the plot threads that are left from season one. I think they can do it admirably, but we will see. But yeah, I think those types of big moments, since we are going up to the opening scene of Rogue One, those types of things have to be at least referenced, and we have to at least hear some of the impact that certain things in other media has had on these major characters of Andor. So, long story short, yes, I do think we see some version of her at least discussion about the Gorman massacre, and I think we probably see Gorman massacre leading up. We're getting Krennic. Why not get Tarkin back with even better CGI around his face or deep fake technology we could do for him? Might as well. And then, yes, I agree. We need to bring back Bail Organa, bring back a lot of these other elements from the rebellion side, and start to push the story to where it is in Andor, which is Andor working on Yavin 4 with all these prestigious members of the Rebel Alliance. And for God's sakes, bring in Garm Bella Bliss as well.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
moving back to the chat. So again, we will be going here for about another hour, depending on the flow of the conversation, everybody. So keep sending in those chats. That was our one main topic to discuss. We have some subtopics we can talk about if we feel like we need to add some stuff. I've now played Outlaws, so I can give you guys my thoughts on Outlaws. Now, I haven't finished it, but I've put a good amount of time into it, and I've actually been enjoying it more than I expected. And Sanak, you're a lot further through than you were last week. It was like a day or less
Yeah.
into it starting last week. So we can talk about it a lot more in depth if you guys would like to hear more of our thoughts on Outlaws. Again, we will do some form of review, whether it's a story only review or just kind of a brief game review. And we don't plan on it being this really in-depth video because by the time, we can get it out without access to the game early, everybody else has their reviews out, and it's not going to do that well for us. Pretty much on our channel, none of our game reviews have done that well. So hopefully you guys will enjoy it when we do the official review, and keep checking out those walkthroughs that are coming out on the channel as well. But if you want to hear our thoughts on Outlaws now a week into it being out, let us know. Other than that, we're just going to keep running through the chat here. So also, you can send in your super chats as well, like David did, if you'd like to get a chat bumped up to the top. But we are going to go start from the very top of the chat here with Anthony's questions and then work our way down. And if you haven't liked the video, there are more people watching right now than have liked the video. Make sure you like it. And if you are new, join us every single week. We do live Q&As and talk about the news, if there is any news, every single week. So make sure you stay tuned with Star Wars Lads for all that great content. All right, back to Anthony's comment, who says, hey guys, sorry for missing last week's stream, but won't be in the chat as much as I used to be because I'm back in college for my second semester. Well, good luck at school. Anthony also says, I follow you guys on Twitter. Your tweets are getting good, especially when you repost a tweet from Hello Greedo. But what was the context of what he was saying? Because I don't get it. Well, Sonic usually does
That's
most of
me.
our tweeting, so I will pass that to you. I have no idea what the tweet said. I really do try to avoid Twitter at all costs.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this as just a overall thing. Like, I don't use Twitter. I mean, Liam used to use Twitter a lot more in high school. This is really like my first exposure to Twitter with Star Wars Twitter, and I still don't like Twitter that much, but I can see like the appeal of like immediate thoughts and reactions and stuff like that. And we're primarily using it just to build our community to attract more people who are like-minded, who are open to critical but fair discussions about Star Wars. The tweet that Hello Greedo had was more about just like a general sentiment about how everything is monetized, everything is kind of made to be complained about, right? Like all these systems that we live in, our social media, our video platforms, and all that. Like, it's no more about like real conversations. It's about like immediate reaction and usually negative instead of like sitting down and like saying, is that real or is that just you like exaggerating stuff like that? Let me pull up exactly what he said here. But I think that's that tweet from him. Not only did I agree with that, he is someone who historically, if you've like followed Star Wars YouTube, he was around, especially in the very early days of Star Wars getting very popular on YouTube.
Mhm.
And he did not like the prequels. He was very vocal about that. Like that used to be one of his gimmicks on his channel. Like he do kind of mini skits throughout his videos, just saying like why Attack of the Clones was terrible or like mocking scenes and all that. But then he watched Clone Wars. He said like my fandom changed. Like people were coming in my comments saying, "Oh, you got to give Clone Wars a chance. These parts of the prequels that you didn't like, they're still there, but like there's more understanding, more like weight, and like just better connectivity and lore behind it." And he's not someone who like still loves the prequels, but he's grown to appreciate it. Like he was around for Episode One. He was very nostalgic for it, but as a whole, the prequel trilogy for a long time, he didn't like it. And he's also been very upfront about like, yeah, I was a little too negative because that was something that I noticed just sold well on my channel. That is what got me
Yeah.
a lot of my initial attention, right? Like this is something that has been there since Red Letter Media really started doing their first commentaries on Phantom Menace, right? And you can give them a lot of credit for how they've changed too, and how they are really just there to have fun conversations that are in depth, still about like having a fun, goofy time. But, it is an early period of Star Wars where it was just nice to just bag on things once we got social media, once we got YouTube. That criticality kinda slipped away to, like, exaggeration and all that, and now it's like that for every franchise. We're just so much more used to it as Star Wars fans because that's just how it was when we were prequel fans with forums and all that, right? And a lot of these new
Mhm.
age fans who came on because of the Acolyte or came on because of the Clone Wars or something being renewed in 2020, or loved the Mandalorian when it first came out, right? They're starting to see a lot of the same stuff that we did, but there is so much more money now to be made by just being negative, being performative about it. And that's where he doesn't like. He's like, I don't get that. I don't understand that. I don't condone it, right? And that's why I shared it, because it's like, I agree. Like this is like someone that I've for years like been following, really appreciated his commentary on Star Wars. He doesn't always pop up these days, but he still does, give his feedback and stuff. And yeah, I agree with that. I think that's it really mimics a lot of the sentiment that we have on our channel. Like, we know we're not like again, we know when we've been telling you guys on videos and streams for such a long time. If we wanted to be negative and performatively negative, we would not be at 13,000 subs, right? Which this is an incredible year for us. Thank you guys so much for that. But we could have been closer to like 100K or something, or we could have paid someone for, boosting up our SEO and all the keywords and the buzzwords that will attract that subset of Star Wars fans. But that's not who we are, right? Like Liam does not like the Acolyte, but we didn't like market that as a thing. All right. We're just like, you know what? We're engaging with it. One of us kind of likes it, one of us doesn't really. And, we had some differences, but that doesn't mean that we didn't get to have great discussions at it. That doesn't mean we didn't have a great feedback from community on their thoughts and all that. That's what we cultivate here. And that's what YouTube used to be like too. YouTube used to be much more of an innocent place as well. But just like Twitter, just like all these places, it's just about the money, and the money for a lot of the big Star Wars YouTubers who used to talk about lore, but now just talk about like grifting and culture wars and all that, right? Like it's almost like double down for in their minds that like this is what I should be doing. This is what it actually is like. More people are listening to me. But how much of that is real too, right? And at the end of the day, you turn off your computer, you stay away from your phone, you talk to someone in person, you'll get a very drastically different experience with Star Wars than you would ever would online. It's just a fact. And even what we're doing here, it may not be the same as if you met us in person. So, we try to be as authentic as we are, but sometimes it is a little frustrating being online as a Star Wars fan, and especially as a Star Wars creator.
Oh yeah, it's always frustrating. I mean, we have a great community, and these are one of my favorite things to do because it reinforces that there are so many other people out there who see Star Wars in a similar way to us and who just enjoy and appreciate the franchise and want it to be the best it can be. But yeah, it can be there's it's almost a blessing in some ways. You know, we still try to respond to every person's comment who has something of value to say. But now we get it's hard to so if we ever miss anybody's comments, usually it's because we get so many comments a day now with the channel having grown that it's hard to see everything that comes through. But it's a little bit of a blessing in that way because then you don't see the negative ones as much, or if it's there, it goes away pretty fast and is buried by other comments, and then you can move on. But yeah, I don't really go on Twitter, so I'm not really sure about all this stuff. And then Anthony asks about specifically Star Wars theory, and I don't really want to get into that either. I don't want to talk about any other YouTubers really on here in a or I mean, we can talk positively, but I don't want to start, talking about what Star Wars theories reactions were to all that, especially because he will end up, somehow reacting to this as well. Uh,
That is his thing
but
now. Here's my response, and it's like, okay.
but so yeah, we're not going to talk about him or any of that. But he's got his trajectory on the channel, and that's what works for him. And this is what we're doing for our channel. Um, but yeah, next up we have Skywalker's Academy, who apparently loves The Last Jedi. Says it's a fantastic movie. Glad you enjoy the film. It is certainly an auteurist movie. Anthony thought it was okay, but has a lot of uh, but the hate around other people and the actors and actresses who like the film is insane. Yeah, we definitely agree with that. Anthony also says the current version of and why do you think there's so much backlash to The Last Jedi? Well, I feel like we talk about the sequels and all the flaws and everything around it so much every time on one of these streams. So I'd like to keep this brief. But I think the main reason there's backlash, I think first and foremost, and I think this covers all the positive view of the film and the negative view of the film, is purely expectations, right? I think there was a hyper aggressive marketing style for The Last Jedi about this is not The Force Awakens, guys. This is different. This is new. It's going to blow your mind. It's going to shock you. It's like Empire Strikes Back. There's a big twists and turns. You're never going to see what happens. And I think with that kind of marketing style, I also feel like behind the scenes, that was kind of a bit of the mandate, or at least what Ryan Johnson wanted to do in terms of I want to write this film where nobody's going to know what's going to happen next. And I think when you build up something like that, it's never going to meet everybody's expectations because the twists and turns don't work for some people and really work for other people, especially when you have that many twists and turns. So I think that's the first thing, and that's one of the reasons people love it, and that's another reason people hate it. And I think the other reason that people love it and the other reason people hate it is also Luke Skywalker. And it's also similarly expectations. It's like, what did you want out of the Luke that we see in the movie? For all intents and purposes, the Leia and Han you see and the Chewbacca and the C-3PO that you see in The Force Awakens are the exact same ones that you would expect to see. They're similar to the ones in Legends. They're similar to the ones that you had in Episode 6. Luke is extremely different. And for a lot of people, with Luke being kind of the main character of the original trilogy, that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Other people loved it. I'm kind of in the middle, but a little bit more towards the negative side. I would have much preferred to see like the ultimate Jedi Master version of Luke instead of one down on his luck the whole movie, especially when you kill him off at the end. I say that every single week, I feel like at this point, but why kill him off right after we get his peak? Maybe we should have waited a little bit longer to see that peak a little for another movie. Um, but so I'm a little bit more on the negative side of the way Luke was handled across 3 movies. Not necessarily the specific arc they chose for him. I think that arc can work, and I've detailed so many ways in so many videos about how they can make it work now. But I just think I think it was the direction you chose to take one of the big 3. The other directions for the other big 3 and OT characters were very safe. This one was very different. I think it's really just those 2 were the main driving forces behind a lot of the vitriol and discourse around The Last Jedi. And then other things come up and are birthed out of a general lack of consensus by people, because I don't think these things. I think a lot of vitriol doesn't necessarily start before there's a bit of discourse about and division about the overall quality of something. Usually, when there's a lot of discourse and division on the overall quality of something, then you can have other voices rise out of the ashes that are more not really critiquing the film and more attacking the rest of the audience. But when something is, like almost universally praised, then it's harder for those voices to be heard because they just sound like idiots when they're saying something's terrible when it clearly isn't, for those other reasons, right? So I think that's where those types of voices are born out of, just division, and story wise, The Last Jedi leaves open a lot for division.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with a lot of those points. I'm a little bit more on the positive end, and I will say I do like Luke's trajectory. I just wish JJ took it an extra step further instead of like a reaffirmation of like, yes, he's finally been redeemed, right? Like, I wish there was like a little bit more juice behind that, and a little bit more of that weirdness that Ryan Johnson did find with his characterization of Luke. But like you said, Liam, it is a lot of expectations. Like we were discussing before about the Hello Greedo tweet. That was kind of the start of YouTube becoming such an easy place to monetize, right, and make a lot of like statements that are like all encompassing. Right? There's still
Hmm.
hour to 3 hour long deciphers of like The Last Jedi, just like there were with the prequel trilogy films for so many people. So similar things that happened in the early 2000s, late 90s, but also definitely the fact that there was like you said, aggressive marketing, kind of composited over The Empire Strikes Back, same way as The Force Awakens was kind of compositive over a New Hope as like the trajectory of how the sequel trilogy would go, the Star Wars that we all want. And a lot of these again are my opinions, but I also think that was around the time when the prequel memers kind of really came to full force. I think 2016, 2017 was the peak of that. That was when, ironic love of like the flaws of the prequel trilogy became unironic, became almost like aggressively a different polar different direction. It is in some ways a reflection of our social media, and like we've talked about in different streams, of how it became a lot more about different players with algorithms and all that, pulling people apart who are not that dissimilar, but just might have a little bit more cordial disagreements about things. Um, the states were in a very politically intense period of time. It's not like they ever haven't been, but that was when we were in college, especially where we were going at Berkeley. It was tense, no matter what, right? And a lot of people that still criticize The Last Jedi without talking about the story, oftentimes kind of land on buzzwords that I find are like, yeah, that is more about where you stand as a person than necessarily about what the film is trying to do. Um, but I mean, I think one of the biggest things to continue on Liam's thread there, it's the fact that it's a good film, but it's not necessarily a great sequel. And it sucks because Ryan Johnson did have JJ make some tweaks for the end of The Force Awakens and all that, but also JJ didn't offer him a lot of rich world building to build off of. That is where the mystery box has become so criticized over the years. Like, it started off with Lost and how Lost ended, and that is considered the worst, best case version of the mystery box over the years, with Star Trek Into Darkness, with The Force Awakens, and then The Rise of Skywalker just being its own entire Pandora's box of crazy elements kind of being pulled out there for the sequels. Yeah, like I will still say Ryan Johnson, I think, did some pretty interesting things that I still think connect pretty well to The Force Awakens, but I also don't think that there was much of a runway for him to like be like guided by, dictated by, that we kind of expect, especially in the modern day of franchises, of trilogies, of these long running stories that we expect. And that's not something we know from the start that George Lucas would have done. That was one of his biggest criticisms of The Force Awakens. Like, yeah, that was fun, but that's not the movie I would have made. He still says The Last Jedi is a beautiful film. I really appreciate it. We know a lot of the story elements about this, like Colonel Kurtz kind of Apocalypse Now version Luke is in this film, and a lot of Ryan Johnson's script is actually adapting a lot of those elements. It was always going to be controversial regardless of the creator, but I think Ryan Johnson was so focused on like this tourist vision of his for so long at times that he kind of slipped away from like, hey, this is like a franchise with expectations about connectivity, continuity, and even if it does get a little messed up, there shouldn't be a lot that has to be like fleshed out. And one of the things that I've really come to a conclusion after May and the last few months of seeing Star Wars in theaters and all that is that this is a film that definitely could have used a time skip of at least a year. It is still such a strange decision to be like, hey, 20 minutes later, the Starkiller base has been destroyed. We're going to come and destroy the car and force evacuation, right? Like, we didn't need necessarily that introduction. We didn't necessarily need these things to happen so immediately. And I think a lot of the character arcs that Ryan does take these characters on actually works better if you say, let's breathe for a second. Let's make sure that we get to fill out the world a little bit, make this chase like almost like the end of the line after like a year of like a lot of struggles of failing to connect with all these other former rebellion heroes and your republic heroes and all that, right? And it's frustrating that from in that sense for me because I, as much as I still don't like things like Rose's final line and all that, I just struggle with more of like this was a sequel to a film that never really gave a concrete road to follow, right? And you can say like, oh, the original trilogy had better planning, this prequels had better planning. Not really, but they at least had George Lucas like there the whole time to like avoid some of these pitfalls.
Yeah.
And Bob Iger also definitely pushed these films to be out very quickly instead of like waiting for the story, like Kathleen, like a lot of the Lucasfilm crew really wanted. They're like, we're not ready for things like this, especially the Rise of Skywalker. We weren't ready. And you can say a positive for like the Rise of Skywalker is like, hey, it came out before COVID hit. At least that we could have ended with $3 billion films, and we're not in like a money pit that might have worsened the state of streaming for Star Wars or something. Yeah, I guess there are some positives, but yeah, there's a lot of different elements, and I think it's sadly a little telling that even people who had some positives, like Star Wars Theory, you could still check on his channel. He ended up finding a lane that was like, hey, the things that I don't like about this, they sell well, right? So yeah, a lot of different things are happening. It was a tense time, and we had someone who came in with such a very specific vision, but that wasn't necessarily one that the franchise ever was ready for, that trilogy was ever ready for. And, we've been dealing with it because the Rise of Skywalker was like, let's take another step forward and change things and the dynamic instead of committing to what we've actually done here with The Last Jedi. So, yeah, it's difficult to say. We could talk about it for hours and hours. We probably have cumulatively over these streams talked about
Oh
it like
God,
10
yeah.
hours at this point. But, you'll always hear different angles from us and still some of the key points that we're always going to land on.
Yeah, I feel like this something about the like why did the sequels fail or what do we not like about the sequels or what do we like about the sequel? Just all that type of stuff. It comes up every single week. Not
Yeah.
tired of talking about it, but it does seem to come up every single week,
And it's
which
tiring
is
to
just
talk about it when we don't have necessarily new things to flesh out and smoothen out those issues like we
true.
had with the
Yeah.
Clone Wars, right? It's like, okay, it's not like the last great thing for sequels for us was Shadow of the Sith, which is one of our biggest successes on the channel because that shows interest. But then talking about points from a whole lifetime ago at this point for us and for all of you guys, it's hard, right? It's going to be skewed. It's going to be different. It's not going to be as emotionally vitriolic or emotionally impactful. It's just a thing that always pops up for us.
And it will forever until we get, an episode 10 or whatever, maybe Mandalorian and Grogu just being that next theatrical Star Wars thing
Yeah.
to wash the taste out of people's mouths. We need something for people to eventually move on. Or, frankly, we need another thing that would get people to stop talking about it would be if there was a worse movie. Yeah. But anyway, Father Karras says got to pay for his Lambo somehow. Oh, I think that's in reference to a comment above. Yeah, and I appreciate the Exorcist reference there. Tahuaroa is joining us again. Thanks for joining us again. I appreciate having you back for a second week. Funky Monkey says, so ridiculous to have 3 years between seasons. I'm sorry, but these shows just don't have the level of quality warrant such wait times. And I'm with you. I was kind of referencing your comment earlier. I don't think really any show has the level of quality to warrant 3 years in between seasons, especially when you're trying to get people to stay subscribed to streaming services, when you're trying to convince people that there's a lot of content and great content, and what's the number one thing on streaming service is speed of content as well. It needs to be speed of great content. And right now, Disney Plus has certainly struggled with that speed element, and they've struggled with the great content element, both of them, really. But the great stuff has been taking a long time to come out. And so even Ahsoka took 3 years to come out from when it was announced, right? So, we're averaging 3 years from announcement to season to next season. It's a crazy amount of time. I think the only way I really excuse that is if they just said, "Okay, look, we had Ahsoka, we've had Skeleton Crew, we've had 3 seasons of Mandalorian. We're moving into film now with Mandalorian. What's our direction now? We have this Filoni movie that was announced. Other than that, it's a blank slate. We could go anywhere with this story. How do we kind of redeem it from the negatives of Mandalorian season 3 and the at times negatives from Ahsoka? And how do we get this thing back on track as our main go-to IP for the future of Star Wars, the thing that's now going to carry the franchise?" I think that's really what the internal discussions were, not just at Lucasfilm, but also across the Disney higher ups as well. And how do we make Star Wars a brand that can sell and dominate box office and TV like it used to? I think they're going forward with The Mandalorian because that's been their biggest success. That's been the most unifying success they've had since probably Rogue One. And so, yeah, and Mandalorian is, unlike Andor, it's something that sells tons of merchandise and gets people excited to see it at theme parks and stuff. So, this is the obvious choice, and I think that's mainly why you're seeing a wait for Ahsoka. I would be shocked if they do a season 3 if the wait is 3 years again. I think they're going to have more of a concrete plan of what they're doing.
Yeah, this is like the unfortunate thing about having this be a story set in a different galaxy, right? And picking up the pieces of Thrawn's life there and his exile there with Ezra, like not having Ezra there to like give context, which in some ways does lend itself to richer storytelling for what Sabine can learn, what Ahsoka can learn, what the Mortis gods offer, what Balin and Shin are up to, right? And I think that will lead for a richer story, even if we are ultimately jumping back to at least some POVs of Ahsoka season 1 characters in our main Star Wars galaxy. But yeah, I agree with all what you guys are saying. I think I definitely wanted to point out that when we started the stream, we have a little bit more of a knowledge of the film industry, and that's kind of what we base a lot of our criticisms and our understandings about Star Wars and about just franchise filmmaking in general. It's just uncertainty, man. Like I'll say again, it's uncertainty about like everything. It's not just Disney, it's not just Lucasfilm. It is all these big IP franchises that used to be like surefire hits in the 2010s and seemed increasingly so once streaming kind of took over and became like that next step after cinematic franchises, right? But it's funny that the same lessons that was there from like 60s and 70s of television, where at one point they were so cheap and so easy and like it looked like they're going to take over entertainment for everybody. Theaters came roaring back, right? They just needed to adjust and tweak themselves, and new Hollywood struck. The blockbuster formula was created. In some ways that'll never be gone, but it's very interesting to think about like what is the new adjustment? Like, are we focusing more on like mid-budget blockbusters instead of mid-budget like dramas that used to be like such a staple of the 80s and 90s, right? Like what is going to be changing about that? And that comes into conversations now with, again, the lines continuing to get blurred and blurred between television and film, right? At the end of the day, we thought, oh, it's so easy to make a movie level TV show. Some ways, but then how come so much of its storytelling has just been like, we have this great idea for a film, let's make it 8 episodes of 30
Right.
minutes and stretched out, right? Like there has been maybe more money made that way by like stretching it out and having the discussions, negative feedback and overreactions until we see the next part. Maybe that was all part of it too, but it was definitely just a lot of overambition, a lot of overspending, a lot of like lack of visibility with the numbers. And once the bubble burst, everyone's feeling it. So, like Liam said, Star Wars, it sucks that the Acolyte got canceled, especially for a lot of those fans who really found themselves connected with it. And it sucks that there isn't a little bit more protection for actors, especially in Star Wars, who have been constantly harassed and hurt even before their work gets to be on screen. But unfortunately, this is like a business thing that's happening all around streaming, all around filmmaking. Like it's incredible that so much of Disney's big success theatrically comes from movies like Alien Romulus and all that that were meant to be streaming hits that were shot for
Mhm.
Hulu and stuff like that, and ended up becoming like theater saviors for them after such a terrible 2023. Right?
Yeah.
It is about learning what how we can balance these two mediums, appreciate both those mediums, make our franchises still be the cash cow and still have good storytelling that engages with the fans who have been here even before the acquisitions and all that. And now, hopefully, there is a more concrete direction. We thought at first it was a trilogy issue. We thought maybe the streaming services under Filoni and Favreau, but it's like all these franchises are finding out, once you put it in TV, it becomes almost too hard to manage, and you still have to make the money at the box office where the general audience still is talking about that stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think theaters have been happier than ever this year because it's been proven now that when you have a success at the movie theater, there's no comparison between it and streaming. I think as filmmakers, streaming has always been a double-edged sword because there are more opportunities than ever, right? Because the need for content is out there. People need content. So there's more opportunities to get random little projects made. They just might go straight to streaming because right now it's pretty much shown that almost anything with a 50 to 150 million dollar budget that isn't a big IP is going to flop. So that's kind of then unfortunately the double-edged sword of this year's box office. But if it's always felt like with streaming that was going to be the trajectory. I felt this way 8 years ago when Netflix was just starting to hit its peak, and I feel the same way now. Unfortunately, it does mean theatrical windows are going to start closing for those movies that aren't at least Oscar contenders, that are just kind of mid-level movies. But we do movie theaters have and always will be events, and we're going to keep getting these event films. So at least if you're somebody who loves going to the movies at an event, I think that's almost confirmed to be here to stay until they can find some other way to streamline that experience. But it seems like audiences have really spoken this year, especially that they're willing to go see something two, three, four, five times if they really enjoyed the event of it. Back to David, who says, I think shooting for Ahsoka is directly or dictated by scheduling around the Mandalorian movie and not stepping on the movie's toes, storyline wise. Star Wars and cinema is the priority as dictated by Bob Iger. Yes, so that's kind of exactly what we just said. But uh, I think not necessarily just stepping on the toes of Mandalorian, because I don't necessarily think the story that's in Ahsoka needs to really be that connected to Mandalorian. It just depends on how many elements of Ahsoka season one they want to keep into Ahsoka season two. Do they want to keep Ezra and Hera and Mon Mothma and New Republic and Thrawn? Do they want all that in season two of Ahsoka, or do they want it to just be Baylan, Shin, Ahsoka, Sabine? I think if they want to just do that, then it doesn't really matter what's going on in Mandalorian. But I think where you're right is that the Mandalorian is now dictating what happens in Mandalorian, and Grogu is dictating the direction they are going to be headed for the future of this little mini universe within Star Wars around the New Republic timeline. So to do the New Republic timeline right, I think they're restructuring how they're going to plan it. They're restructuring how they're going to end it, how long they're going to wait until ending it, where they might have originally considered wrapping it all up in 2026. Now they're considering legging that out for a lot longer. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing because the story we've seen so far has no real end in sight, right? It's not like it feels like, okay, yeah, they're ready to wrap it up and they're just dragging it out. Nothing we've seen from Ahsoka or Mandalorian seasons 1 through 3 indicate any type of conclusion to this story. And in fact, it really is just mostly the beginning of this story. So um, instead of Filoni's movie coming out in 2026, I think 2036 is a much more likely year for that movie to eventually come out.
Yeah, yeah, we shall see. It'll be interesting. I mean, that a big question that, ironically, the Manaverse also raised is like, what are we gonna do with like the popularity of the original Star Wars Rebirth under Disney, which was so original trilogy led with comics, with books, with characters that we love from the 70s and 80s who were missing because of the nature of the prequels and that story being told. right?
Yeah.
And the prequels have gotten a lot of love because the demands of the fans in so many ways, right? Battlefront is not a great game, but Battlefront 2 is because it really appreciated all three eras, like that Battlefront 2 trailer where you could see them going from phase 1 to
Hmm.
Stormtrooper to the First Order Stormtrooper, though I will say it should have been a phase 2 clone trooper instead for a little
Yeah.
bit nicer symmetry. Like that got people hyped for a reason, like that game being so prequel led, right? But then the question began coming up with the Mandoverse is like, okay, well, we're still dealing with this era or like a step away from that really popular era that really dominated that a lot of sequel trilogy originally was mirroring. What are you going to do with these stories that are kind of essential to the characterizations that we ultimately do see about Luke and Leia and Han? What are the stories that are told that that we got through Legends with such almost overt importance, almost too small of a galaxy with them at the center of it? What are you going to do now when you have all these cool, fun new characters, and then when the story brings in these deep fakes, are you going to recast them? Are you going to bring them more to the forefront in the conclusions or the second half or its last third of the story being told, right? And that is a tough question. And I know, again, everyone sees Graham Hamilton before they put the mocap and deepfake stickers on him, and they're like, oh, he should have been perfect and all this and that. I don't think he's got the voice. I don't think you should go with an original trilogy character with someone who's completely inexperienced, right? I'd rather go with a slightly de-aged Sebastian Stan with some makeup or some slight CGI work, right? Other than getting someone who has this massive burden of continuing the stories of these big, big characters, right? And maybe the Mandoverse, the first chapter, the first decade of the New Republic is about all these new heroes, these new situations that brought about like the initial conflicts, the initial stamping out of the slight resurgence of these imperial forces, and then we get to see what these recast characters that second decade where we get to see the young Ben Solo, we get to see these characters live their lives and the difficulties that come about this peaceful era and the complexity of living in this new galaxy that is not necessarily hateful towards some of the things that the Empire did that bettered parts of the galaxy, and still doesn't really remember a lot of the issues that were definitely there with the old Republic and all that, right? Maybe that is the transition where we get to play a little bit of a popular game, but also connect us to a sequel era where we now get to see the new Jedi Order, Rey, and maybe an animated series fleshing out the sequel trilogy. We don't know the ultimate direction. And I think that's where the Mandoverse being so dominant and such a stranglehold on that first decade. Now they're like, should it just be that first decade? Should it be a segue into something else? Should it continue to 15? We don't know. We really don't know. And I hope we get to see those important stories told in a visual medium, even if it might be better in a book or a comic or something else of that nature. But they have to be serious about the original trilogy characters at some point, though they're still the most popular parts of Star Wars. And the
Yeah.
prequel of, notwithstanding with the Mandoverse with Hayden and all that, and Obi-Wan Kenobi show, it still is a slight step below seeing that Luke Skywalker in the Mando season 2 finale for so many of us.
And also, I think with The Mandalorian making a film transition as well, like titling it The Mandalorian, it just is so broad that you can do pretty much anything with it moving forward as well. So if you want to kind of redeem the sequels for some people, maybe go back in that timeline, start working on all that. You could go with Mandalorians and touch on what they were doing during that whole time period. You can move into the future with Rey, with Mandalorians. You could now make this side of the Star Wars universe that had always kind of been more for people who are into lore and legends and stuff like that. Now be kind of the driving force of a new Star Wars universe dictated by the Mandalorians, who people really, really enjoy. And then you can start bringing these other elements back. So there's a lot of room here. And I think that's why it really just makes sense for them to take a step back. Hey, we don't need to force anything out. Let's just make sure we get it right. And I think that's the first step here. You see that often. There's usually two strategies between in Hollywood about what do we do next when something is not working. It's either double or triple down on it, more, get all this out and let's see what sticks, or it's okay, take a step back, no more now for a few years. and now let's make sure we get it right. And then after that, let's try to continue getting it right for a long time. That's usually the strategy that works a lot better. And before they were going with the other strategy of let's make
Yeah.
50 different things and see what sticks.
Yeah.
So I think this is the right move, even if it does mean we have to wait 3 years for Ahsoka. Skywalker's Academy says Sabine didn't become force sensitive. She removed the blocks that were keeping her aptitude at a minimum. Yes, I think we both understand that. I don't know if you're explaining that to us or you're just saying that that's what people's common misconception is. We understand that. I still think, playing with your words a little bit there, she did become force sensitive in the fact that she was never force sensitive in Rebels. There's really no indication whatsoever of her being force sensitive. And then she becomes force sensitive in Ahsoka. But for the larger lore, you're right. She did not become force sensitive in Ahsoka. She is just able to remove her boundaries, which is the same thing Korran does in the Krytos trap. It's just it also is kind of a little absurd there too. So yeah, it is playing around with a lot of the ideas of like what is force suppression, right? And I feel like it makes more sense for Order 66 survivors or Order 66 survivors that didn't tell their children they had the force, but for somebody who's obviously raised in a relatively supportive family, a family that she falls out with more for her own doing than their own, reasonings. And then just kind of she's on the run, yes, but it's not like something that the force would be a benefit to her and her skill sets and the way she lives her life. So I feel like in Star Wars Rebels, I'm talking about. So I feel like it does kind of come out of nowhere. Whereas more so like a Corran Horn, he's born with it. His family never tells him about it because it's too dangerous. They know he has it, but just kind of that suppression, the constant suppression, that would make it a little bit more. I would buy it a little bit more that you discover it as an adult that way, more so than I'm a warrior who's trained from birth to utilize all the skills I have, but I can't figure out how to use the force, or I didn't have any real connection to it until now. All of a sudden, I have it in the Ahsoka show. You know,
Yeah.
that's I think for the frustrating part.
And I mean, look, we understand what you're saying 100%. Like that is what their the Ahsoka show's background, its backstory is implying, right? But then that raises the questions of like, okay, like she's capable of fighting off Shin, not well to start off with, considering she gets stabbed, but she's able to be trained and hold herself off. How is that
Mhm.
that much different than what we see in Rebels, right? Like you're saying with the Vanguard, right? Like Van braces, like she's so adept and able to, handle herself and push back as needed. Like no disagreements to that, like, but that is also, like, a common thing for Mandalorians. They are, like, the superhumans of, like, the MCU, where they're like, "Yeah, you're not gonna beat a god per se, but you can hold your own for a little while," right? Like, and that is ultimately what's the downfall about the Mandalorians. They're so powerful, they're so capable. They got their 1 second, guys, sorry. I choked on some saliva, I think. Um, yeah, but they're so capable, they're so strong, but then, they ultimately always lose to the Jedi because the Jedi have abilities that the majority of them never can dream of, right? It's like all the cards are stacked against them, and that's just how it is, right? That is it's their ultimate enemy because they can fight them off, they can cause massive damage to these Force users, but once the Jedi and these Force sensitives are really brought in line and really can counter them, they're not like a real existential threat, right? So it's nice to say like, oh yeah, she was so capable. But then there's questions of like, how much is that just plot reasons? How much of that is just animation? How much of that is just like, Filoni wants to make his Ghost Crew have like the whole concept of like the Force flows through every being and every part of the universe, and can we just say that Han Solo, who's super lucky, who kind of gets out of everything when he practically shouldn't, right? Like running through those Death Star hallways, shooting at like hundreds of troopers and not getting shot at, right? Like, does that make much sense? No, I wouldn't say he has like much physical capabilities like a Sabine does, honed from day one. No, but then I could also argue like, hey, but that is just what the Force willed. That is what was meant for him in that moment, and maybe being around other Force sensitives almost like rubs off on you in a beneficial way. Like those are other arguments that you can make outside of her just being Force sensitive. That her skills were amplified by being next to a Kanan, next to an Ezra. Maybe Hera's were in the same way. Her incredible piloting skills were always just a little bit better once she was with that ghost crew and their connectivity and their family. Yeah, those are all, I think, arguments to be made that don't necessarily line up with what you're saying, but can also be alternate perspectives. But yeah, like that corn horn argument, right? He has the Jed coin and everything else. Like, there's always people talking about, like, hey, was your grandfather and me friends? Like, you seem familiar and all that. Like, there's so many hints, even if they're not necessarily hints about him becoming a Jedi, hints of a Jedi lineage. You could make the same argument. Maybe Sabine now is a descendant. Her family has connections, almost like an Aragorn of like a broken, but now finally unbroken line from Tar Vizsla. Maybe the Civil War of the Mandalorians had a faction wiped out of like force sensitive Mandalorians before, and that they were fighting with the Protectors of Concord, Dawn, Bo Katan's father's group, all the open season characters like the Vizslas and Jango Fett's and Jastamiro and all that, right? There's a lot of ways to do it, but then if you make it simply like, oh, she's a descendant, then there's an argument of like, well, it's not as rich as like having something be a little bit of like, oh, it was just like a one-off, like Corrin's father being a Jedi or his grandfather being a Jedi, and he's not necessarily something super special. If you think about it too, his weakness is that he can't use telekinesis. That's like a huge, huge visual part of like being a Jedi, that you can pull things, you can push things, you can choke things. He can't, right? As great as the Force is for him, as great as a pilot as he is, as a Jedi, that is such a huge weakness for him, right? So now having Sabine use the Force, maybe you could have done a Corn Horn where she couldn't use the Force in that way, but it shows itself with mind tricks or something of a different character
Mhm.
and element, right? And I think that would have been better received. I'm sure people would be like, "Oh, that's just Corn Horn. Now you're stealing that away from him and
Right.
his specialness." But there's a lot of different arguments for it. We're not saying we're upset with it. It's just that that is like something that is like a very EU way of handling her character and a story that this doesn't necessarily need it. But it's Filoni's. He wanted to do it. Who are we to argue with it? And I hope that they do good things with it. I hope that she struggles to connect with the Force at times. Are we saying that she connected with the Force after the trauma of her family being killed off and everyone on Mandalore being killed off? And that's what like let it be unleashed. So why wasn't she able to stay and maintain that when she's more calm and peaceful? Is that why Ahsoka figured it out? Like those are questions that the Ahsoka show fails to handle without any flashbacks to that training too. So that's all. It can easily be improved, but it's fair to criticize that if there was a flashback that was necessary to the Ahsoka show, it might have been them meeting Ahsoka, escaping, her dealing with her own emotional state, being alive after being killed off by Vader, and that connection to that apprenticeship and why they fell out, right? So there's a lot of things about that Force sensitivity that can work, has roots for sure in Star Wars history, but could have been handled a little bit better over 8 episodes.
David says, "What's going on with the Ray movie?" Well, I saw your question a little earlier, and I looked it up in the most recent article I can find because I feel like we talked about this relatively recently. Was from May, where they said it was going to start shooting in November. Now, I haven't heard anything else about it. It might start shooting in November. I really doubt it. I wouldn't be surprised, and I don't think it really has anything to do with the people behind the Ray film, other than the writers who they seem like we haven't heard anything about a full confirmed script actually being done. Almost every time somebody talks about the Ray movie, it's always like, yeah, it's in the process and it's getting close to having another draft done. So it could be writing delays. But I think just in general, I really do think we're gonna have another kind of gap after Mandalorian and Grogu. I don't think we're gonna go into having 5 Star Wars movies in 5 years again, or I don't think we're gonna go to having 5 Star Wars movies in 3 years after Mandalorian and Grogu. I think they're really playing it safe and just being like, let's make sure we nail our first attempt in Star Wars live action theatrical film in 7 years by the time that movie comes out. then we'll worry about everything else. And I think they want to nail it. Whether they wait until that movie actually releases, that's one thing. But I think they're gonna want to at least finish shooting that movie, seeing what it looks like, making sure they feel confident on a direction there, and then they'll get to everything else. But who knows? It may still actually shoot in November, but I really doubt it because I feel like we'd be hearing more about it more because it is such like a not only is it a hot button topic for sequel haters and people who like to to hate on Ray and this whole production and the people behind this production, but it's a hot topic because it's the future of Star Wars. We're going beyond Episode 9. This really should be the one that everybody's talking about. Instead, we're talking about Mandalorian and Grogu. This really should be the movie that, if it's coming soon, they're hyping up as the episode 10 that it really is going to be, even if it's not called episode 10, right? So um, I would doubt they're actually going to start shooting this year.
Yeah, and filmmaking is pieces working together, not necessarily aligning perfectly, right? We know this is a script from Lindelof for a long time, and then Stephen Knight from Peaky Blinders kind of came in. They're doing a Peaky Blinders film, so now maybe he's submitted a draft. Now he's gone back, right? There's a question of like, if there's too many hands in the cookie pot, like, are we really going to make this work out, right? With the writing, I've seen some rumors from in Snyder and all that, that like Charmine's maybe a little frustrated that there's a lot of crabs in the bucket. Everyone's voices kind of coming together, fighting over each other. Not in like necessarily a negative way, but it's just like everyone is like, this is has to be a great return to the sequel era, to this new
Yeah.
story, to the future of it. And she is someone who's had a lot more control over filmmaking because she's been a documentary filmmaker. Really, her only like live action fictional efforts have been in Miss Marvel.
But yeah, it was good discussion today, but we'll see. We'll go here for a few more minutes. As for who said it, Anthony, should it be 1,000 or 10,000 years or more or less for the Sith to come back? I believe you're talking post Rise of Skywalker. I'd like it to be some type of significant amount of time. We don't necessarily need the Sith. I think one of the things for me, while the one Sith aren't perfect, the Lost Tribe of the Sith aren't perfect, I don't mind a splinter group kind of arising out of the ashes of what was the Bay Knight Order of the Sith that die with Vader and Palpatine. Like, I think that's something to me that, yes, it's still kind of playing with the semantics of the idea of the Chosen One prophecy, but it to me, it's still the idea that Anakin was the Chosen One and Luke, they destroy the Sith. You move on to something else, even if it is Sith in name, unless it's part of the Banite Order of the Sith, which I believe the Chosen One prophecy is really about. You're never going to completely eliminate the dark side. So, which is why I kind of like the idea of Kylo Ren originally, this dark sider who's not part of the Sith and Snoke and all that, So I think going that direction with maybe a tribe or a spinoff or something that just uses the name Sith, but it's not really Sith in ideology, I think that's more of the way to go. And you can do that, 50 years, 100 years after, or 15 if you're doing the Ray movie. I'm okay with any of that. I just think for the true Order of the Sith to return, if they ever do that, they should wait a long period of time.
Yeah, and where we are timeline wise, if we are trying to use a Legends comparison, it we had the kind of the Vong situation, which
Mhm.
it's so all encompassing, and then they aren't part of it afterwards. Like there's some terraforming, Vong terraforming that's actually pretty good for the galaxy, but then the one Sith kind of mess up and force this situation of like turning against the Jedi and their protection from the Galactic Federation and everything. So yeah, like I guess you could go for something like that. I don't know if we necessarily are in a place for a Vong for that to happen. We still need to see the Jedi Academy equivalent with the new Jedi Order of Rey. We, it's a difficult question. I think the Sith shouldn't necessarily come back this quickly. Even the one Sith kind of coming back is a little too fast in my mind. Like, it's nice to have Jedi who get to thrive for a bit and you can almost end the Skywalkers by having them have their piece. There isn't a piece for them, right? You can argue Legends with New Jedi Order with the Vong War. It's so massive that it makes that the Imperial Civil War, the Galactic Civil War, is so small in comparison, and its devastation on the galaxy. And yeah, I know everyone's working together and all that, but you should still make the Empire terrifying, especially when they're striking back after the Battle of Yavin. That's something that's like kind of missing when Legends once you bring the Del Rey's move into bringing the New Jedi Order into such prominence, right? So it's a tough thing. I do like Liam said, enjoy the Knights of Ren, enjoy different like Sith groups, acolytes of the Beyond, who will be getting a lot more of a focus in the Battle of Jakku maxi series in a couple of months, right? Like, yeah, like it's all nice to have that, and it's nice to have the Sith kind of pull strings or direct people in different directions. I actually really don't mind that, like absolutely not. Um, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the Sith themselves as an organization make sense with the chosen one prophecy of coming back so quickly. And I like that it is like they're throwing everything that they have left at the remnants, the polarization, the extremism of the First Order, and its indulgence in imperial propaganda and everything, to then come back and like be so devastating at first because it is a very stagnant galaxy. But then after that, it should be more about like, let's deal with the consequences. Let's get everyone together. Let's move into these new interesting defeats and victories and more philosophical debates about who we are as a galaxy. Should we really have a unified galaxy under one government and all that? And what is the power of the Jedi? Should it be curtailed by the Senate? Should it be a little bit more free as it was when they first, were fighting off Darth Bane and all that, right? It is a really interesting place to take the galaxy right now. It can do parallels that can come with a future Old Republic adaptation of some sorts. But for now, would I want 100 years or 1,000 years? I prefer 1,000 for sure.
Colton says, I'm hopeful for the future as always. Uh, well, glad you are. We are too. We're always trying to be optimistic about the future. David says, Mon's Senate speech in season 1 was about the Gormans. It connected to your super chat. Yes, it was. And I do think we're definitely going to see the Gorman massacre, even if we don't see the direct connection to the Rebels scenes outside of, the hologram. Damn Fine Cup of Coffee says, they should build up and conclude all this The Force Awakens heir to the Empire stuff before moving on to the future with the new Jedi Order, and also seeing first JO for context contrast, first Jedi Order for context and contrast. I assume you mean like Luke's first Jedi Order. And I definitely agree. I've been saying it for years that the build up to the Force Awakens, it's 30 years of time. People like to simplify it and make it seem like it's 10 years or even 20 years, which was what Legends did before New Jedi Order. And I think a lot of people who don't know Legends, they like to condense it and use that for their arguments without ever having read it. But Luke and Mara don't get married until right before New Jedi Order. They don't have a kid until at the end of New Jedi Order. So Legends events are really spread out. And even with New Jedi Order, it takes place only 20 years after Return of the Jedi, or after New Hope, like 25 years after New Hope ish. So yeah, there's all that fits into this Force Awakens to Return of the Jedi to Force Awakens time period. So they have so much to build up, endless stories to tell about the OT characters as well as the characters we're seeing in TV and film now. And so it really should be their period that they're almost completely focused on, because it doesn't need to be exclusive to the Mandalorian characters. And that's what we've been trying to say for a long time. It's what I was kind of trying to say with my should we move into a Legend cinematic universe video, with just the fact that the OT characters belong in this timeline. And the more and more you do this timeline and you don't touch on them, the weirder and weirder it gets that they're not a part of this. Like Leia is actively part of the Senate dealings until about 5 years before The Force Awakens. So she should be heavily involved in this. Kylo Ren doesn't turn to the dark side until 4 years before The Force Awakens. There are all these massive events that are going on in this time period that are central to the main characters. And the further and further you get through this and the bigger and bigger conflicts and problems you do without touching on those characters, that's the problem. So if the only way we're ever going to get those characters in this time of timeline is to almost do whether it's a recasting or just do another universe that focuses on recasted versions of these characters, I'd be down for that too if we want to do that as a parallel to this, if they are afraid to go to the with those recastings in the main universe. But yeah, they have to do all this stuff, and I definitely agree with you that that should be their focus. But I think right now Star Wars is trying to find its next big thing. It seems like it's the Mandalorian, but I think they want to branch out into other timelines or parts of the timeline as well to see if that could be their next big thing, whether it's Dawn of the Jedi, which we haven't heard a single thing about really since it got announced. So I don't know how if that one's the next like Taika Waititi Star Wars movie where it's just yeah, it's there, but it's never going to really be worked on until it eventually gets canceled. Um, or if it's actually going to happen. But yeah, they could move there. They can move after. So I think they're desperately trying to find that lane. But if Mandalorian blows up, don't be surprised if all those other things that are announced get slowly pulled back or slowly disappear and they fully focus on this build up to The Force Awakens.
Yeah, and there's always the chance of it being extended, buying themselves more time for these recasts. Like, even if we don't get like a Legends version of them or some sort of continuation there, like to satisfy people until that happens. Like, I do think that recast is happening. There's no way to, even if the technology is incredible, there's no way to 100% get it, and it's just so much more effort to get someone to stand in, do the mocap, do the CGI, especially with how much strained CGI is and how people are working to the last minute. How much Disney, especially like with Fantastic Four and all that, is now committing to like, let's do previs, let's have things set up first instead of rushing and editing and changing entire story stuff like 2 months before release and stuff like that. That is a very common thing with current day MCU that they're stepping away from. Like Liam said, Lucasfilm hasn't necessarily had like a huge problem like that since Rogue One, arguably, but they've had more of a problem of being like, okay, well, is this what we really want to commit to? They got to commit to something. Hopefully they do soon. And I'm still of the belief that Dawn of the Jedi, New Jedi Order, and obviously this New Republic conclusion film are all still going to be tied together. I don't know, like Liam was saying much earlier in the stream, if Ahsoka will be as central to that New Republic film as she was, in the original plans. I think those three are being tweaked still. I don't think those are going away, but maybe their connectivity is going to be a little bit more focused on eras that they can parallel to. For example, like I wouldn't be surprised now if we're going to take a lot of this Mandoverse era and parallel it a little bit more to what we're doing with the New Jedi Order film. Like you said, bringing in Grogu as a character, a little bit more older, young adult, and by his aging, I guess, something like that could be an angle that they're really trying to really foster connectivity with. The whole question of how valuable is streaming to the narrative that of Star Wars versus just being like one-off titles, right? Like they went for a full MCU model. Is that something they want to continue? Is that something that they want to double down on? Like there is a lot of questions there. I think Star Wars is always great when it fleshes out things. Again, at this point, we need more original trilogy stuff so that the reflections of who they are in the sequel trilogy and what the next generation learns, maybe we can at least learn it in parallel to some degree. Like, oh, this is why Rey is reacting that way because now we're seeing this is what Luke was struggling with at the earliest onset of like the first phase of his academy, like the Jedi Academy equivalent era or something like that. Like those things have to happen, right? And I think that's maybe what they're trying to balance out. Maybe that's what they're trying to make the shows a little bit more worthwhile for like independent stories. But if you pair them with the big theatrical release, it actually enriches the story that you're watching. So maybe that is kind of the angle that they're going for. But yeah, they do need to give a lot of story and a lot of recasting has to be done for those original trilogy characters to really make it worthwhile, make it like concrete and definitive in the way that we expect stories around these characters who have carried Star Wars since its inception.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited either way. I don't think that they're all canceled. I think they're being reworked. And I
Yeah.
think they're being very careful with New Jedi Order because this is a very young director who you want to make it as easy as possible to bring out her unique elements of voice. We've seen Leslie Headland. She had a lot of say on her writing, brought a writer's room, all that. Those are very smart things to do, and especially with these franchise shows. But now we can question things about, was the budget really worth 180 million? Did they have to do a lot of reshoots and all that? Like,
Yeah.
those are things that they have to learn from, right? They have to be like, okay, Charmin, we're trying to keep it at this budget. We're trying to get the previs done. We want to not step on your feet by changing the story too much during the production of it. Like, try to be as hands off when you need to be hands off, but be fully on board and, like, working out all the little differences and all the different issues that are rising up during the pre-production of it, like during the concepts, during the planning stages, right? And it is a franchise. You got to make this worthwhile for people engaging with the different multimedia of it. So yeah, I mean, maybe they don't even want to do a parallel between Mandoverse and New Jedi, or maybe they're like, we need to get this Luke Jedi Order show in place so that way people get hyped for Once Raised and why it's going to be different, and why we love the sequel trilogy, get our first stabs there before we go into a sequel trilogy of sorts, right? Like, it's a lot of questions, a lot of questions. I still think 2023 Celebration was the first start of it. I think Acolyte being a 2020 investors call announcement, that was kind of like the last big thing of it. We're gonna start seeing a lot of those streaming only era mistakes kind of pull back, hopefully in 2023 being that first launch pad. Just in the same way that video gaming exclusivity was such a big mistake to start off with, now Outlaws is like, it's pretty strong, it's pretty solid, and if hopefully we get a lot of other creative games that aren't huge and all encompassing, maybe that's the same thing we're gonna get with our movies and with our shows.
And I think part of it too for Star Wars, what they want to plan with the future is how do you diversify your franchise, right? To where when something ends, you don't have a massive viewership drop. I think Marvel's trying to figure that out as well, right? We have the Infinity Saga end, and then whether it's COVID or then just the general not as good quality of their product. It could be all those things, but in general, viewership didn't return to where it was with Infinity Saga. Yes, we've seen some exceptions, but they have been exceptions because, and frankly, a lot of people have said, why do I want to watch more of these or get invested in another big story? I already just finished this 24 movie saga, right? And I think Star Wars has that problem as well, right? The people have always been into the the main saga, and even the extraneous material, the books that people love, they're connected to the main saga. The comics, the video games, a lot of it's all built on the backs of the main saga, not to mention the animated shows, which are all directly tying into the main saga. So how do they diversify their franchising, especially in a time period this big, a 30-year gap? How do you diversify your franchising to win? If you do, like you're saying in your second comment, damn fine cup of coffee, you do Mando, Ahsoka season 2, Rogue Squadron, the Han, Luke, and Leia stuff. You build it all up. You do an end game like Filoni's movie that was originally pitched in Celebration 2023. You finish it. Now, where does your Star Wars viewership go? Right? Do you continue doing stories in that time period? Where is the Star Wars viewer, where are the Star Wars viewers going to go? Or are they in for, in 10 years down the line, let's say, another massive drop off like they've seen over the last few years where they're trying to figure out what's the direction for the future? I mean, that's inevitable when you're successful, right? You're always going to have a massive drop off at some point because you can't maintain that level of success like the MCU was maintaining. And when you start fresh again, you have to reprove to your audience that it's worth investing that time once again. So that's going to be a problem no matter what they do. But I think it's a matter of, does Star Wars now choose to say, hey, we tried The Acolyte, which is set 100 years before The Phantom Menace. We tried Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, Mandalorian as a set of shows. We've tried Andor, which is now more traditionally set in the dark times. We've tried Bad Batch set in the dark times. We've tried all these different things set in different periods of Star Wars. Does Star Wars now say, the one that's been the most successful financially for us and viewership wise has been New Republic era? It's the one that can feature a lot of stuff that we want to redeem, like the sequels, as well as the things that are most universally loved, like the original trilogy. Can we connect all this stuff and just say, hey, the Acolyte was a great idea at a time, but now let's cancel that. It didn't have the views we wanted. It didn't have the reception we wanted. Let's also, Andor's now ending. Let's just only focus on New Republic era storytelling and give it a massive push and really go for it and just make people fall in love with this era? Or do they continue with the direction they're going now, which is like try to find as many different eras of the Star Wars universe that people like, and then go into the ones that people love most, and then slowly look for what's next? There's pros and cons to doing both. There really are. I'm not really personally for one or the other. I think they're I would like to see them, having said all that, double down on the New Republic era at least for the next few years and really get something right. You know, really make sure they nail that one specific era and then move on and maybe try to do some other things. And I think in that way, that could be one of the other reasons why you see the Acolyte getting canceled, because they're like, well, let's not touch all these other things that we don't need to right now and spread ourselves too thin like the MCU has done. Let's focus on one thing where our best talent is all working on this one big initiative, and let's sell it as a big initiative. It's interesting, and I think they could really do it that way. And it seems to be the direction they're kind of choosing. And I think there's really no reason not to like delay the Ray film in that scenario as well, because Daisy Ridley's supposed to be 15 years older than she was in The Rise of Skywalker, anyways. So if you wait 15 years, she's exactly the age that she should be. Now, by then, she might not want to do it, or, there's a ton of problems you could have. But there's really no like logical real world reason not to delay that and just focus all your chips in one basket for now and really get something going. Just have something that you could always fall back on. And for the MCU, that was Guardians of the Galaxy or Spider-Man or now Deadpool, right? They had these things to fall back on when the new stuff wasn't working. Star Wars hasn't had anything to fall back on because everything's been new and they're trying to figure out that direction. So if they can just solidify something for the future, I think that would really help the overall quality we get for everything, because it wouldn't just be let's throw stuff out there and hope it sticks. It would be, okay, we really want this next piece to be big as well. We have our team for Mandalorian. Let's find a team for this and really make it work. So I hope that's the direction they're going. It seems to be the direction they're starting to head to. And if that's the direction, I can't fault them for that, because it would be a smart play at this point for them.
Yeah, and again, that should still be the big thing. I know there's people who are like very upset about the Acolyte being canceled, who are like, "Oh, we're just repeating the same thing. We're going to see another Clone Wars esque show and animation." And I think that's a fair argument. Like, it sucks that we in the streaming era we can't get shows that get to have a second chance and improve themselves, just like a lot of network TV did, just like a lot of initial streaming era did. That's true. I agree with that, and I wish that we got improvements for the Acolyte, or at least like a rework spin-off show or something of that nature. I hope the multimedia around it's going to be great. I hope that it gets even more connections to the High Republic, which is insanely good, even with like that drop off of Phase 3, which is that it's just like it's building, as opposed to like why aren't we seeing these like big climactic things that we saw that really define Phase 1 between every adult novel, right? So yeah, I mean, I think Temptation of the Force was a good first step forward in that sense, but it is also just like dealing with consequences of Phase 1 still. And now that we're past that, I think we're going to have a really, really strong end of Phase 3. Really excited for that. But yeah, I want the New Republic to be fleshed out with the original trilogy characters. New and old should really be able to thrive here to close out this era. And then you can introduce them later, closer to the sequel stuff. You can give a lot of credit to George Lucas in that sense. He just doubled down on the prequels. He's like, this is what I'm doing. And he
Yeah.
fixed a lot of the issues with a good team around him, right? That people did not like about the prequels. And then the kids who loved it even more. The people who were indifferent were like, oh, that actually makes me appreciate these films. And, I can turn them on and then watch an awesome episode and something like that, right? I wish that was the next step after episode 9, that we actually got Luke's Jedi Order and stuff like that. I wish that was the priority. Mando was never meant to become like this massive 10 years, first 10 years encompassing thing. It was always a little bit more of a lone gunslinger vibe before Filoni brought in a lot more Mandalorian lore, and then it became such a runaway success with Grogu being involved, right? So yeah, it sucks in that sense. I do want Star Wars to continue doing new things. I'm also not unopposed to them finishing off some of the best stuff that they have for sure right now. I hope animation is a great gateway for a lot of these eras. Maybe you can look at the Acolyte and be like, that was awesome for its fighting and all that, but maybe we should have taken the first step away from books and comics into animation first, or a video game, and then jumped into a TV show, right? And yeah, you got to be right with these shows. At the end, we're at this. We were. It came at the point where there's so many announcements, so many like slightly upsetting things for people, and some people loved it, some people hated it. All of streaming and on every platform was going down, and the Acolyte took the brunt of it because it wasn't as good as it could have been. Right? That's just a fact. So um, I wish it was still around. I'm okay that it's not, because I hope that it means that once we return to that era, we're really going to give it a lot more care and polish, and not repeat the same mistakes that we have with like the end of the sequel trilogy with The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. So I hope that's what they're facing right now with Mandiverse. They're like, I don't want to get a number 3 strike here with the Mandiverse kind of messing up. Let's make sure Mandiverse
Yeah.
ends really strong, gets the money out there, brings the recast. Next 5 to 6 years, be that. But then at the same time, hopefully animation is where we can start seeing a lot of these newer stories, things that not we just want to fill in the gaps, but get to experiment, right? I hope that's where we continue with the High Republic era. We get something in between the High Republic books and the Acolyte to further bridge it. I think that's a great way to do it. Maybe a MMO or something. Uh, we shouldn't be done with these eras, these new eras, but they should not be equally emphasized in the same way when we have something that needs to be concluded before we move on to the next big money thing, which is redeeming the sequels. So yeah, that is how it is. It is a business decision first and foremost, but why not improve the things that people have seen the most, and then anything else that comes that is new gets pure focus, pure polish. Like if the Old Republic got the Acolyte treatment, I think Disney would have lost all their faith. You can at least say the High Republic is not that well known, and it is very different of a show from the High Republic books that you can work around it, just make it another High Republic show or multimedia thing instead of like the big crowning end jewel that was supposed to be. But yeah, I mean, I can't deny I want to see incredible storytelling with Luke and Grogu and Din and Bo-Katan and Ahsoka and all that come to a head before we move to the Jedi Order of Luke and all that, before it can parallel with the new Jedi Order of Rey and all that. Make that stuff happen. Really, it should happen. It is where people truly care about. And once you get that kind of coasted away where they can kind of take more of their time, take gaps in between that, that's when you bring a little bit more emphasis to these shows that and these eras that have hopefully at least gotten some attention and some creative input through animation, which has always been the strongest suit of Star Wars.
Well, I think that's going to wrap our stream up for the day there. So that was a great discussion, everybody, especially for not having much to talk about today. So thank you so much for bringing those questions and those comments for this entire stream, giving us almost 2 hours of time to talk about it. We went a little longer because of the problems we had for like 10 minutes or so there. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Make sure you come back next week. We'll be back next week again to give you guys our thoughts on anything you have to ask us, as well as whatever the latest Star Wars news is. As keep an eye out on the channel for a lot more content. Sanak has been posting those Outlaws walkthroughs. If you want to check those out, check those out. We will have a review out at some point here soon once both of us get done with the game, so that we can give you guys our thoughts, even if not that many people watch it. Check out our review. We also will have plenty of other great content coming here, and of course, shorts every other day and posts every single day on the channel. So thank you guys so much for watching this video, and we will see you all next week. Good night, everybody.